Hi, I'm Debra Birnbaum with Gold Derby, and I'm excited to be here with the team behind Paradise. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, well,
Hey. Hi.
Congratulations, and I know you're all busy shooting season 2. Dan, I'd love to start with you. Take me back to the start of production. When you first came up with this idea for the show and you got everyone together, what was your way in? What was the mission you gave to everybody to go create the world of Paradise?
Well, I mean, almost everybody here is a team that worked with us on This Is Us, and John and Glenn and I, and had done multiple projects together, movies. And so my thing is kind of, my job is done when I write the script, and then I turn it over to smarter people and so figure out how to make this thing. And so I think, we had a lot of conversations about how we were going to bury the secret at the end of the pilot. That was where a lot of attention went, I think, of the bigger conversations. And that involves every department here. But yeah, I mean, I think the challenge here was obviously, obfuscating the world that you thought you were in, the world that you were in versus the world you thought you were in for 58 minutes of the pilot. And that was the biggest challenge, I think, of the entire undertaking.
But that also continued throughout the rest of the show, trying to create these two worlds, a real world, and then also given the flashbacks, that you're going to balance both of those worlds together. How did each of you, and I'll go around, go about creating those two worlds that felt like they were going to live together and that, weren't going to give away too many secrets that were going to play out over the course of the season? Why don't we start with John? I know this, you did a lot of the writing here. John, talk about how you were going to bring this look to the scripts.
I mean, we have a great room of writers. And so there was so much discussion about it. And it was one of the first things when Dan and Scott Weiner and I got together with Jess, and we're just talking about the show, is like, how do you make this post-apocalyptic, but also kind of have this humanity in there? And so that was always in there, like the like flashing back and finding the heart and kind of the origin where a lot of these people come from. And so there was always that goal, like, okay, how do we dig deeper into these characters and really kind of, find what motivates them? And there was a lot of math too. Like, I can't tell you how much, like, you should see the writer's room with the cards up trying to track a murder mystery, but then also the emotional journey of all these characters. So it was a lot of discussion, a lot of writers who really, really care and have very passionate discussions about what fits into what pieces, is kind of what sort of the whole experience was. But it was very fun.
Dan and John, can you take us through some of the debates in the writer's room? What were some of the discussions you were having?
Oh my God, we had so many debates. I mean, part of when you do a show like this that explores stories in time and adds like a science fiction element, I always try and hire writers who don't just sit on their hands when they take issue with something, and because I think those are the most interesting conversations. They can also just kind of send you in circles for days, arguing stuff and debating stuff. And so any number of examples from the really technical stuff that lives underneath the show that we're really exploring in the second season right now, which is how that bunker is powered. I mean, there are conversations about geothermal and nuclear energy that boggle my brain, and I kind of check out.
We'll come in there and Dan will be like, if I hear the word systems level one more time, I'm walking.
And then it's just questions of, big picture questions, like can we kill Billy Pace that quickly in the show, and things like that, which are more conceptual. And so I think that becomes a part of the conversation too. There's the sci-fi conversations, and then there's the theoretical conversations about character. And then there's, we only have 8 episodes, and where are you going to choose to tell your story? Who's getting backstories? Which are worth it? I like to take our big ideas that sometimes we think of as the end of a second episode and move them all the way up to like a 3rd, 4th, 5th episode. And then where does that leave us? And so there's lots of conversation and lots of debate on any show we do together, but particularly this one.
The killing of Billy, that was something Dan was like, what if we do that right here? And that caused, I think, the biggest fights in the room. I feel like Mark Lee was about to walk out on that one.
Yeah, that was a big one.
John and Glenn, I'd love to hear from you, your perspective as directors. You obviously directed the pilot and then, again, came back in the finale. What tone did you want to set in the finale what tone did you want to set in the pilot that would then play off throughout the season that you could then revisit in the finale?
They may have had a lot of discussions in the writer's room about this world, but they didn't have enough. We said, let's have 100 more. So we had to design the world, and we had to there's so many stupid questions and just meetings about cans, and that's not an exaggeration, and cars and this sort of thing. And I had a screaming match in our office with Steve Beers, their line producer, about cars, about what color the cars would be. And
There were lots of conversations from John about cars.
but I mean, it's like I've been saying, it's the hardest part, but it was the best part. It was awesome. Building a world is what a thrill.
One of the things that was a big one was, the final shot at the end, Deborah, was of the pilot, was something that, I mean, even at the end when we felt we had it and we were happy with where it was, and we had a really incredible VFX team, at the very end, I wanted to make some changes, and I had people working over the holidays right before we aired in January, working over. I was like, do we have the money to take this one more level? And so, but conversation like that, I mean, me and John and Glenn and our post people, sitting with pointers at the screen, you know what I mean? Kind of trying to figure out how to make it. I mean, that was an unending process until literally 2 weeks before I think we aired.
Yeah, it was pretty late. And it was a big swing, we early on when we first read it, when we kind of had been hearing about it for a while in different forums. I mean, the first time I heard about it, Dan, you were talking about it as a movie about a Secret Service guy and a retired president. That was the whole idea, for a feature idea, and then it evolved and evolved and evolved. But just the idea when we read the script, I was like, wow, this is a really big swing, and that just was thrilling, terrifying but thrilling.
Sarah, how did you approach from a costume perspective, knowing that you were going to be building and dressing people for two different lives, the pre and post-apocalyptic world? How were they going to dress differently? How are they going to look differently?
It's so cool hearing all of this, by the way, the behind the scenes before I even get there. I was sort of thinking a lot of these thought and conversations, they happen before I get there. And so I think when I arrived, I feel like a lot of my questions were, how does this translate visually? And I feel like if there's a word for how we went about that, it sort of had to do with restraint. So how do we really think through what clothing might be in the dome, and how people might wear that clothing without making it too much of a story about oh my God, crazy apocalypse, and also being able to sort of hide the twist in the first episode. So yeah, I think it was, and also I thought that keeping humanity to it, so it doesn't just become a story about, or it doesn't just become a visual story about the insanity of this idea that people, may live underneath the earth in a dome, which actually isn't that crazy to a person living today, I think. I saw this story and I was like, yeah, I could kind of see it. So without making it just a shocking story, what would this look like? Keeping the humanity and keeping it something that people could really relate to. So I think for us, that really meant being very true, and then true, but maybe with really good tailoring. I just really found that keeping everything well tailored and feeling kind of tight would be a good way to maybe create a tension in what people might be wearing.
And Zoe, I'll ask the same question of you. Did people bring lipstick with them to the dome?
So we wanted to make sure that, people had their creature comforts with them, that there would be things down there to make people feel better, to feel calm. And so that women and men would have those products available to them in a limited amount. So there was a limited palette. There was a limited sort of choice of products that you would have. We equated it to a CVS in 1984. And then we had some colors and things we did that just felt like little pops.
Everybody brought something there, brought stuff there in bulk, the same, 5 of the same couch. It's stuff that you'll notice if you look hard enough, but, the cars are, they were just bought in bulk and bought there. It's only the billionaires who probably, got all the good stuff stacked up in the basement.
So you didn't have as many fights about lipstick as you did about cars?
Cars was the one.
One of the things that's very cool about this show is that there was more big picture thought than necessarily you're seeing in every moment on screen, meaning the we had as a group, like our department heads and our directors had rules of our world. We have Bibles and papers that were written on the kind of infrastructure politically of the world. And you don't see all of it in every frame, but hopefully it has a kind of like subcutaneous effect on the entire thing where it feels of one world, because the people who were making it had a lot of thought behind everything. Even if, we had talked about furniture and we had talked about cars, endlessly about vehicles and the political system underneath the bunker. And while you're not kind of verbally talking about it the entire time or showing the cosmetic section of the kind of CBS that Zoe described, it is in there, and hopefully it infiltrates in all little and big ways throughout the first season.
I remember hour-long conversations about what television programs did they let people watch down there. It never made it to air, but just every detail was discussed.
Like there's a scene where the kids are listening to music in the library, and the thought behind it was, if there was too much pop culture from before and not enough created down below, at a certain point it could decimate people, because everything you're listening to and seeing is made by dead people ostensibly. And so the thought was that there was a certain amount of media in houses and in rooms and in programs. But if you wanted it, you kind of sought it out at a special place in the library. Now, you just see a kid listening to music in the library in the listening section, and that's where Cal goes to make his final mixtape. But there was like bigger picture thought behind it all for us who were making it at the time.
Well, I think that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Like, you had to create two worlds, and there's so much intention that went into creating both of those worlds, because you pick at anything and then it starts to fall apart. So really, there was so much intention that went into all of it that it really has to translate.
The lighting and everything, I'll speak for Yasser since he's working right now, was instead of doing what I think a lot of shows do, apocalyptic shows do, which is, in your flashback, the world is, the world's warm and organic, and in the bunker, it's gray and, cool and everything. And we did the opposite, to say it's this more idealized version of the world. So it's the light is warm, all the clothes are organic fabrics. It's everything is, upcycled and recycled, and it's like a pure little place, and but it's built on this rotten idea, which is basically it's a bunker for billionaires, and many thousands of people needed to service them. And that's why it's not like a silo filled with people in a concrete brutalist bunker that's built to save as many people as possible. This is made to save a lot of people, but mostly
preserve a lifestyle.
Mostly a select few, and those who tend to them and make it feel normal, because they don't know how long we're going to be down there. And then the flashbacks are also, it's raining and this usually gray, and the color palette's different, and it's all there, but we're not flashing it.
Well, then, Sid, why don't we move to you to talk about the music? What themes did you want to evoke? The music is really so powerful. So what were you trying to accomplish with your score?
I was just trying to make Glenn, John, and Dan happy, I think.
Good goal.
The beauty of working with these guys is that they bring, we treat music like it's anything else we've just talked about, like discussing it early on before even shooting a frame of anything. So Dan sent me a script, and then I wrote this little melody off of that script, and the guys seemed to like it. And then we spent several months trying to develop it, like together. I would send pieces of music to the guys here, and John would, John send a text back and saying, "Hey, can you write me a piece of music that feels like we are trapped and we can't escape?" And we will use that music in the edit and cut with it, and create, just create me a tension piece, So a lot of this, and I spent so many months trying to find sound. It was recorded violins and cellos, and percussion, and all sorts of other instruments, and looped them and sort of messed them up in sort of the production. And, I get to sort of feel like I'm in a band again, working with these guys. So that's always special. You don't get to on most television and film, you sort of you come in at locked picture a lot, oftentimes. Composers come in really late in the process. But here, getting to come in really early in the process allowed us to experiment with stuff. and I got a sense of what everyone was liking too. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned at the top that this is a lot of the crew that you had worked together before. What shorthand did that give you? What did that allow you to accomplish with this show?
I mean, it's everything. For me, like speaking selfishly and personally, it allows me to focus on the more important part of my job, the part I'm good at, which is writing and editing, and not worrying about how the show gets made, because I know I have great people making it. And as I've gotten further along in my career, it's like a lot of people say it, and I've often said it, which is like, I like giving my stuff to smart people to interpret it and see kind of what they do with it. But you kind of can say that a lot, but if you don't trust the people, it's not really, you're not really doing that. On this, I very much, both on This Is Us and this, my last two shows, I've really given the pilot and the vibe of it to John and Glenn to say, like, go take it and run the show. And I'm here for any big picture conversations you want to have, if we want to talk about things. I don't go to set very much, even during a pilot. I don't, and I'm sitting and running that very intricate writer's room with John and figuring out the stories while everybody's making a television show. And that only works if you have very talented people who you trust, because if people are trying to like always do the job but not really feeling trusted, then they're going to do it kind of on their back heels. So you feel it when you go on our set. I'd say 80-90% of our crew was from This Is Us. Is that a fair assessment, guys? 80%, 90%. And so it's a shorthand that goes all the way down to like the second, third ADs on set. We move quicker. There's a nonverbal rhythm to our set. There's a nonverbal rhythm to our departments. I mean, Zoe and Michael know Sterling intimately, and so it's like it just all carries through, and it just makes life more familiar. It's like when you're packing up a car with your family, and everybody kind of knows in your immediate family how that goes and where the fights are going to be. It's kind of like we have that as a crew, and you're starting like with a head start.
Speaking of Sterling, we haven't talked much about him, but what does it mean to you to work with Sterling, and what did he bring to the role?
Oh, he's awful. Terrible guy, terrible actor. No,
we got him there.
I was telling Sterling the other day, I saw him on set, and I was telling him I have this new bit I'm doing in my life, which is, when you go home and you see your family or you see people who aren't in the industry, you always, during This Is Us, I would always get like, what is the cast like? And they would ask about their favorite characters. But now that I've done 2 shows in a row with Sterling, that's a main thing I get is like, what is Sterling like in real life? That's what anyone will come and ask me. And my new thing is I just go, and they go, and I go, it's not good. And they go, really? And people are good. And you watch like their faces drop and they're devastated. And then I tell him, I was telling Sterling about the other night, he was like dying. But no, he's the best. I mean, he's such a force as an actor. I love him in this role. It's so different than what we had just done together for so long. And he's a tremendous leader on set. He leads with enthusiasm and infectious laughter. It's a fun place to go to work, because like the most famous, biggest force on set is the world's nicest guy, and it's just everybody follows that lead. And so it's a real pleasure always coming to set when Sterling's there. There's never any tension, and he's so good at his job. It's very rare that you find somebody who's as good at their job who's also that nice and kind of generous. So it makes it easy.
And he couldn't be more in contrast to the character that he's playing.
No, I mean, that's what's so great. I mean, Sterling wears emotion, and I think it's something that he worked out with John and Glenn and all our directors subsequently so nicely, which was how to pull back on the kind of the parts of him that are Sterling and Randall Pearson. And he's a much quieter, much more internal character. It's very alpha. He doesn't express himself emotionally very easily or very often. And I think it's such a star turn for him in that way. It reminded me of like when I watch like young action things with young Harrison Ford or Denzel or Tom Cruise. It's like movie star, like 90s male movie star thing that like you don't get all the time. And it was such an interesting turn for him here.
John and Glenn, for you, once you got past the pilot and established that world, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced going forward as you were making the show?
I would say 107, which all takes place in the past in the White House, and having to reconstruct the White House, including the lawn and all of that, was just full of challenges but thrilling. We had a big set that was on an entire soundstage of interconnected rooms, which is a big portion of the executive floor of the White House. So, but just, I remember early in the season saying, well, when you start building these new rooms, because we had the Oval Office, and then in the corner of the stage, and I go, well, when we start building all these things, we want to be able to walk from one to the other. And they were like, the look on their face, so like, really? Like, yeah. It's like, we got to build that over there. So they built it so it's all interconnected the way it is actually at the White House. So that was a challenging but thrilling show.
We have a very good budget, but we're not, Andor or something. We're not here $25 million an episode or anything like that. So there is a lot of Frankensteining. There's a lot of creative solutions to create it, because it's such a big canvas, and then to have to do that, not on a shoestring, but we just have to really, smart spend and figure out where to put the money. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Season 2 is like that too. It's a huge world, and you got to find the way to tell a story. And that's what 107 is told, basically from the human, the main character's point of view. We're not like outside in Paris and then kind of seeing the world end everywhere. We're all in one place, and that's the way you can do it. Cheaper is to be there with your characters and experience the situation as they experience it.
Yeah, but I also think it's unique. It's a unique way to tell a story. It's a better way to tell a story.
Definitely.
There is no Roland Emmerich shot of the Capitol building imploding. It's like, you're like, if the Capitol building implodes, if somebody catches it out of the corner of their eye, and it makes it so much more visceral and real, I think,
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it's how we all sort of experience these things for the most part, is on our television screens and our phones and things like that. I think it just made it so like you're in that moment that you've experienced firsthand.
John, how did you approach writing that episode?
I mean, look, I was lucky that one came up right, and you kind of, there's a batting order in mine. It's like I wanted that one so bad because it's just like it had everything that I love in it, with sort of military and kind of all these things. And for me, it was really, we had a great story, and I just kind of, my wife actually, when we have a house in Solvang, she went up there, and I just locked myself away for like 5 or 6 straight days and just kind of lived in it, because I really wanted it to feel like it was happening in the moment versus like very alive. And by having my wife away, Dan will laugh at this, there's all these, we have bad cell coverage up there, gates open, and we have dogs that get out. And so I could really feel this feeling of like, what if you can't get in touch with someone you love? And what if there was a real emergency? And for some reason, that kind of just kept feeding into it for me. But for a lot of it, it really was just trying to find little bits of humanity sprinkled throughout that, so people aren't superheroes at all. And there's a speechwriter who's mad on the last day of the world that a callback in his speech is being cut. And someone's annoyed at the CIA is, interrupting them in front of the president. And I felt like finding those little moments of humanity kind of just helped at least me ground how I felt as I was writing it. Like, these are actually really people in this thing, and they're all kind of in over their head. So yeah, that's what it was. It was really just kind of living in it in the moment and just kind of going over it again and again.
Sarah, for you, was there one character to dress who was particularly a challenge, or a moment that or a character you're proudest of, like, oh, I really nailed it with this one look?
Like, I love all my characters, of course, and all the things.
Of course.
I think, and I could say great things about dressing everyone, because everyone is such an amazing collaborator. Like, I think Sinatra felt like a big challenge. Because how were we going to dress her to say all the things that we needed to say, and to sort of fit into and stand up to the other people in this world we created, which was very real in some ways, or we really thought about how to make it seem very real. But Sinatra kind of had to be this, I feel like, force of nature that was really driving a lot of this story that was, let's say, the fantasy, or the story that we were really trying to underline it's being real, but it was kind of like the twist, and something that will exist like outside of reality. So yeah, like and Julianne Nicholson is very, very easy to dress, of course, and an amazing actress. But I think finding the right silhouettes and the pantsuits, I weren't going to say Hillary Clinton, and the pants and this strong silhouette that also wasn't going to say like fashionista. That really was a like pretty tight line to toe. And I think also in the beginning, we sort of grappled with this thing where Sinatra maybe was going to wear a hat. And that was like a really, really big source of conversation, whether the hat was going to happen or not. And I feel like maybe it went down to like the minute before she went on set, you know, and then it was like, okay, what feels right in our story, in our frames with Julianne? Yeah, I'd say I felt really proud of Sinatra, but I felt proud of everyone too.
Yes.
Of course. Zoe, I'll ask you the same question. One look that you're proudest of, or that was particularly challenging that you feel you nailed?
I think the librarian, because that was such a challenge from the very, very beginning. Before we even started shooting, from Michael and myself, Dan asked us to do a test on him. I think we came up with about maybe 20 different looks for him, different mustaches, beards, wigs, all kinds of stuff. And then we sort of settled on the few transitions that he had. But he's a tall guy, and it's like finding disguises, if you like, for him where you could lose him in the crowd visually. And I think we succeeded, because I don't think anybody really spotted him throughout in such a way that they pinpointed, you know, who he might be. And it was a lot of fun, because it was prosthetics and wigs and all kinds of fun stuff for that too. So that was, I would say, one of the more successful, more challenging looks we had for the show.
It was such a big part of it because, you know, he's in the first, what Zoe and Michael did, like he's in the first episode as the assassin, and then he's living in plain sight as a different character throughout the entire series. And then you have to not get it for half of an episode that's about him in his former state in episode 8. Like if you start going, oh, it's the librarian, it kind of ruins it. And I don't, you know, listen, was there occasionally a person who would write on like Reddit, like I think they're in an underground bunker, once in a blue moon somebody would hit on something, but I don't think anybody ever saw it. And like we had a premiere screening months ago now, and Ian, who plays the librarian, and we screened the pilot, and he brought, I think, his manager of like 25 years and maybe his mom, I forget. And they like loved the pilot episode, but after they said, we just wish we could see one that you were in. He goes, well, I was actually in that one. And his like own family that realized that he was the guy that played the assassin after having watched the pilot. And so that was like, it was very cool. I mean, because the whole thing would have fallen on its face if it hadn't worked.
Was it always intended that it was going to be him?
Yes.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
It was a pitch. I didn't know who was going to be at the very, very beginning when I wrote the pilot, but then right when we gathered the writer's room, one of our writers, Gina, had said, I think it would be cool if it was someone hiding in plain sight. What if it was librarian? And then I think I said, what if the librarian was the assassin? And then we're like, how are we going to do that? And so then we were casting with an eye on who could pull off the performance and also who could be malleable to what Zoe was going to do to him and who would work. Because, you know, some faces aren't, you know, hideable. And so we sent him before casting him. We hired him for makeup tests with Zoe and then and Michael. And then it was a long process.
But that's it's interesting you say that, Dan, because that was the show. The show was like, there were so many conversations that ended with, and if this doesn't work, we're screwed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we had so many conversations like that. You know, like the end of the day, you're like, man, we had like 12 conversations.
There's nothing. We've now done it. I've done it a bunch of times, and John and Glenn and I have done it. We had a big twist in Crazy Stupid Love that we did together. We had a big twist, obviously, at the end of This Is Us, and then this one. And there's nothing crazier than, for me, it's always like I go up to the edit bay and I start bringing groups of about 8 people who are strangers, usually friends of writers, and they have to know nothing about the show. And I just start screening the pilot. And that is always the high point of the experience. It's like when you feel confident that you have it, and we've locked it for ourselves in the edit bay, and then putting it up in front of people for the first time and going like, is this going to work? Like when it gets to the end, are they going to be surprised? Are they going to follow it? And then when you start seeing, they're watching the show and you're watching their faces, and then you quiz them after, and you're like, oh, it worked. And then I do that on every episode. So I do that with episode 8. And by the time I get to that group who's been watching along with the show, I'm watching to go, are they going to get that it's the librarian? Did this work? And you just don't know until you start screening it. You only have your own gut instincts and your internal group that know. And so that's always a really exciting part. And it was like that with the makeup in 8.
You really do like to write yourself into corners. I mean, you just set this high wire act and then you just keep raising the bar with every episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun, right? I mean, they're giving us all this money to make a TV show. Like, it shouldn't be easy, but once in a while, I'll think to myself, God, it would be really nice to just write something linear.
We
Like,
always say that.
yeah,
We always say that.
There's so many good shows out there. We don't have to make our own. We can just watch TV shows.
I think there's a whole show in the making of this show.
it would be very boring with a lot of dorks.
Yeah.
What did you all learn from making the first season of the show that you're going to bring to the set, that you're bringing now to the second season?
Cut the script down early.
I haven't learned that.
I haven't learned.
Every word is precious.
You know, it was interesting. One of the things is, you know, you learn by the response to a show. And so obviously we end our first season with Sterling heading out into the world, and that was always part of the plan. But you start learning, like, man, people love our bunker and they love our cast down there, and they love the dynamics of those folks as well. And so that was like a learning lesson of, not a learning lesson, but something carrying forward into 2, which is like, we're going to be out sometimes with Sterling. We're also going to make sure we live with the stuff people love in the bunker as well, and just kind of finding that balance. It was like an exciting thing to discover, that it's not just that people are tuning out when Sterling's not on camera on his A storyline. People love Sinatra and Sarah Shahi and you know, and John Beavers and James White. They love all the storylines in the world that was created down below. So that was an exciting thing to be reminded of as the show came out in the world, the response to it. I don't know if that's about the making of it.
Talking about this show is so hard because there's so many spoilers. It's like you can't talk about anything. So like, and that's like sometimes you'll notice when you have a question, we're all kind of like thinking as hard as we can.
There was a marketing campaign for this show where, like, they were not allowed to market what the television show was. I mean, it's a really challenging. I mean, think about all they were selling a political thriller with a president and a Secret Service agent, and the hint that there's more to this story than meets the eye. And then I remember even like, and they were awesome about it, Hulu and the studio, because that's kind of a ballsy thing. And then I remember there started being like, after a couple of weeks, there was like this feeling of like, the show is hit. And we'd like to start expanding the messaging and starting to own that now people know it's out in the world and what the twist is. And we'd like to use that in our materials. And I kind of was like, no, I don't think we should, because I know myself, it takes me a couple of weeks to get to a new show sometimes. And and they were very bravely, like, never kind of spoiled it. They would sell big secrets and big stuff, but they never said this is an apocalyptic city underground, the world has ended. They never, and that's obviously a thing you could use to get people there, and they resisted that. So that it is, like John's saying, there's a big pause because we spent a year and a half of our life afraid to talk naturally about this television show. The cast had it worse than us. We do an interview once a year. They were doing 4,000 press interviews, and so it was hard on them.
Yeah, they were very good at not answering questions, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sterling would come to set and he goes, I think I blew in an interview. I said this and this. I'm like, you're okay. And
Yeah.
All right, so I'll leave you with one last question. Give me one word to describe season 2.
I think it's very ambitious, I think, is a good word for it. We're doing a lot of stuff.
I was going to say bigger. That's the word that comes to my mind.
John Requa?
subjective.
Glenn?
That's surprising.
I was going to say surprising. It's incredibly cool. I've worked on the first couple already, and it's awesome.
Messier.
And Sarah?
Sad because I'm not there.
Sarah got 12 jobs before we could get back for a second season. So we lost.
No, I was going to say that's what I learned. Don't take another job and wait for season 2.
Cautionary tale. Well, thank you all so much. It's really been a pleasure, and congratulations again on an amazing first season.